Chapter 8 of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 8. Museum and Menagerie Horrors. A menagerie of beasts and birds means a collection of captured walking and flying creatures, taken from their natural modes of life, deprived permanently of such modes, and suffering more or less in consequence. The bird, used to the freedom of forest and air, is imprisoned in the most limited quarters. Its plumage there is never as fresh and glossy as it is in its natural state. It does not live long. The captive life of the many species brought from the tropics is very short, especially of the smaller and more delicate species. Bears, lions, tigers, deer, wolves, and all other animals like liberty and freedom of range, as well as man. In the menagerie they are deprived of it. The air they breathe is often fetid and impure. To the burrowing animal, earth is as much a necessity and comfort as a comfortable bed is to us. The captured burrower is often kept on a hard board floor, which, in its restless misery to get to its native earth, it scratches and wears away in cavities inches in depth. Monkeys by the thousand die prematurely of consumption because forced to live in a climate too cold and damp for them, and no amount of artificial heat can supply the element to which they have been accustomed in air of their native tropic groves and jungles. Seals are kept in tanks of fresh water, when salt water is their natural element. Their captive lives are always short. There is no form of organized life but is a part and belonging of the locality and latitude where in its wild state it is born. The polar bear is a natural belonging of the Arctic regions. The monkey is a belonging and outgrowth of tropical conditions. When either of these is taken from the climes native to them, and out of which they do not voluntarily wander, pain is inflicted on them. Go to a cheap museum now so plentiful, and regard the bedraggled plumage and apparent sickly condition of many of the birds, natives of distant climes, imprisoned there. You see them but for an hour. Return in a few months and you will not find them. What has become of them? They have died, and their places are supplied by others likewise slowly dying. The process of captives so to suffer and die prematurely never ceases moving into these places. Ships are constantly bringing them hither. An army of men distributed all over the world, and ranging through the forests of every clime, is constantly engaged in trapping them. For what reasons are all these concentrations of captured misery now to be found in every large town and city of our country? Simply to gratify human curiosity? Simply that we may stand a few minutes and gaze at them behind their bars? What do we then learn of their real natures and habits in these prisons? What would be learned of your real tastes, inclinations, and habits were you kept constantly in a cage? Is the gratification of this curiosity worth the misery it costs? If a bird wooed by your kindness comes and builds its nest in a tree near your window, and there rears its brood, is not the sight it affords from day to day worth 100 times more than that of the same bird, deprived of its mate and shut up in a cage? Is in its freedom you study its real habits and see its real and natural life, feel more and more drawn to it by the tie of a common sympathy, as you would evidenced in that life so much that belongs to your own? Like you it builds a home, like you it has affection and care for its mate, like you it provides for its family, like you it is alarmed at the approach of danger, like you it nestles in the thought of security. Yet so crude and cruel still is the instinct in our race, that the ruin of the wild bird's home, or its slaughter or capture, is the ruling desire with 19 boys out of 20 as they roam the woods, and cultured parents will see their children leave the house equipped with the means for this destruction without even the thought of protest. End of Chapter 8. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 9 of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 9. The God in Yourself. As a spirit, you are a part of God or the infinite force or spirit of good. As such part, You are an ever-growing power which can never lessen, and must always increase, even as it has in the past through many ages always increased, and built you up, as to intelligence, to your present mental stature. The power of your mind has been growing to its present quality and clearness through many more physical lives than the one you are now living. Through each past life you have unconsciously added to its power. Every struggle of the mind, be it struggle against pain, struggle against appetite, struggle for more skill in the doing of anything, struggle for greater advance in any art or calling, struggle and dissatisfaction at your failings and defects as an actual pushing of the spirit to greater power, and a greater relative completion of yourself, and with such completion, happiness. For the aim of living is happiness. There is today more of you, and more of every desirable mental quality belonging to you, than ever before. The very dissatisfaction and discontent you may feel concerning your feelings is a proof of this. If your mind was not as clear as it is, it could not see those failings. You are not now where you may have been in a mode of self-complacency, when you thought yourself about right in every respect. Only you may now, in looking at yourself, have swung too far in the opposite direction, and because your eyes have suddenly been opened to certain faults, you may think these faults to be constantly increasing. They are not. The God in yourself, the ever-growing power in yourself, has made you see an incompleteness in your character, yet that incompleteness was never so near a relative completion as now. Of this the greatest proof is, that you can now see what in yourself you never saw or felt before. You may have under your house a cavity full of vermin and bad air. You were much worse off before the cavity was found, repulsive as it may be to you, and now that it is found, you may be sure it will be cleansed. There may be cavities in our mental architecture abounding in evil element, and there is no need to be discouraged, as the God in ourself shows them to us. There is no need of saying, "I'm such an imperfect creature, I'm sure I can never cure all my faults." Yes, you can. You are curing them now. Every protest of your mind against your fault is a push of the spirit forward. Only you must not expect to cure them all in an hour, a day, a week, or a year. There will never be a time in your future existence but that you can see where you can improve yourself. If you see possibility of improvement, you must of course see the defect to be improved. Or in other words, you see for yourself a still greater completion, a still greater elaboration, a finer and finer shading of your character, a more and more complicated distribution of the force always coming to you. So you will cease this fretting over your being such an imperfect creature when you find, as you will, that you are one of the temples of God, ever being built by yourself into ever-increasing splendor. No talent of yours ever stops growing any more than the tree stops growing in the winter. If you are learning to paint or draw or act or speak in public or do anything, and cease your practice entirely for a month or a year or 2 years, and then take it up again, you will find after a little that an increase of that talent has come, that you have new ideas concerning it, and new power for execution. You ask, what is the aim of life? In a sense, you cannot aim your own life. There is a destiny that aims it, a law which governs and carries it. To what? To an ever-increasing and illimitable capacity for happiness as your power increases, and increase it must. You cannot stop growing, despite all appearances to the contrary. The pain you have suffered has been through that same growth of the spirit pressing you harder and harder against what caused you misery, so that at last you should take that pain as proof that you were on some wrong path, out of which you must get as soon as possible. And when you cry out hard, and are living earnest to know the right way, something will always come to tell you the right way, for it is the law of nature that every earnest call is answered, and an earnest demand or prayer for anything always brings the needed supply. What is the aim of life? To get the most happiness out of it, to so learn to live that every coming day will be looked for in the assurance that it will be as full, and even fuller, of pleasure than the day we now live in, to banish even the recollection that time can hang heavily on our hands, to be thankful that we live, to rise superior to sickness or pain, to command the body, through the power of spirit, so that it can feel no pain, to control and command the thought, so that it shall ever increase in power to work and act separate, apart, and afar from our body, so that it shall bring us all that we need of house or land or food or clothes, and that without robbing or doing injustice to anyone, to gain in power, so that the spirit shall ever recuperate, reinvigorate, and rejuvenate the body, so long as we desire to use it, so that no part or organ shall weaken, wither, or decay, to be learning ever new sources of amusement for ourselves and others, to make ourselves so full of happiness and use for others that our presence may be welcome to them, to be no one's enemy and everyone's friend. That is the destiny of life in those domains of existence where people as real as we, and much more alive than we, have learned, and are ever learning, how to get the most of heaven out of life. That is the inevitable destiny of every individual spirit. You cannot escape ultimate happiness and permanent happiness as you grow on in this and other existences, and all the pains you suffer, or have suffered, are as prods and pokes to keep you out of the wrong paths, to make you follow the law. And the more sensitive you grow, the more clearly you will see the law which leads away from all pain, and ever toward more happiness, and to a state of mind where it is such an ecstasy to live, and all sense of time is lost, as the sense of time is lost with us when we are deeply interested or amused, or gaze upon a thrilling play or spectacle, so that in the words of a biblical record, a day shall be as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. The nirvana of the Hindus suggests all the possibilities of life coming to our planet. Nirvana, implying the calmness, serenity, and confidence of mind which comes from the absolute certainty that every effort we make, every enterprise we undertake, must be successful, and that the happiness we realize this month is but the stepping stone to the greater happiness of next. If you felt that the trip of foreign travel you now long for and wish for was as certain to come as now you are certain that the sun rose this morning, if you knew that you would achieve your particular and individual proficiency and triumph in painting or oratory, or as an actor or sculptor, or in any art, as surely as now you know you can walk downstairs, you would not of course feel any uneasiness. In all our relatively perfected lives we shall know this, because we shall know for an absolute certainty that when we concentrate our mental force or thought on any plan or pursuit or undertaking, we are settling at work the attractive force of thought substance to draw to us the means or agencies or forces or individuals to carry out that plan, as certainly as the force of muscle applied to a line draws the ship to its pier. You worry very little now as to your telegram reaching its destination, because, while you know next to nothing as to what electricity is, you do know when it is applied in a certain way it will carry your message, and you will have the same confidence that when your thought is regulated and directed by a certain method, it will do for you what you wish. Before men knew how to use electricity, there was as much of it as today, and with the same power as today. But so far as our convenience was concerned, it was quite useless as a message bearer because of the lack of knowledge to direct it. The tremendous power of human thought is with all of us today very much in a similar condition. It is wasted because we do not know how to concentrate and direct it. It is worse than wasted because, through ignorance and lifelong habit, we work our mental batteries in the wrong direction, and send from us bolt after bolt of ill will toward others, or enviousness, or snarls, or sneers, or some form of ugliness, all this being real element wrongly and ignorantly applied, which may strike and hurt others, and will certainly hurt us. Here is the cornerstone of all successful effort in this existence or any other. Never in thought acknowledge an impossibility. Never in mind reject what to you may seem the wildest idea with scorn, because in so doing you may not know what you are closing the door against. To say anything is impossible because it seems impossible to you is just so much training in the dangerous habit of calling out impossible to every new idea. Your mind is then a prison of doors, barred to all outside, and you the only inmate. All things are possible with God. God works in and through you. To say impossible as to what you may do or become is a sin. It is denying God's power to work through you. It is denying the power of the infinite Spirit to do through you far more than what you wish you are now capable of conceiving in mind. To say impossible is to set up your relatively weak limit of comprehension as the standard of the universe. It is as audacious as to attempt the measurement of an endless space with a yardstick. When you say impossible and I can't, you make a present impossibility for yourself. This thought of yours is the greatest hindrance to the possible. It cannot stop it. You will be pushed on. Hang back as much as you may. There can be no successful resistance to the eternal and constant betterment of all things, including yourself. You should say, "It is possible for me to become anything which I admire." You should say, "It is possible for me to become a writer, an orator, an actor, an artist." You have then thrown open the door to your own temple of art within you. So long as you say impossible, you keep it closed. Your "I can't" was the iron bolt locking that door against you. Your "I can" is the power shoving back that bolt. Christ's spirit or thought had power to command the elements and quiet the storm. Your spirit, as part of the great whole, has in the germ, and waiting for fruition, the same power. Christ, through power of concentrating the unseen element of his thought, could turn that unseen element into the seen, and materialize food, loaves and fishes. That is a power inherent in every spirit, and every spirit is growing to such power. You see today a healthy baby boy. It cannot lift a pound, but you know there lies in that feeble child the powers and possibilities, which 20 years hence may enable it to lift with ease 200 pounds. So the greater power, the coming spiritual power, can be foretold for us, who are now relatively babes spiritually. The reason for life's being so unhappy here in this region of being is, that we do not know the law, we go against it, and get thereby its pains instead of its pleasures. The law cannot be entirely learned by us out of past record or the past experience of anyone, no matter what power they may have attained. Such records or lives may be very useful to us as suggestors, but while there are great principles that apply to all, there are also individual laws that apply to every separate and individualized person. You cannot follow directly in my track in making yourself happier and better, nor can I in yours, because every one of us is made up of a different combination of element, as element has entered into and formed our spirits, our real selves, through the growth and evolution ages. You must study and find out for yourself what your nature requires to bring it permanent happiness. You are a book for yourself. You must open this book page after page and chapter after chapter as they come to you with the experience of each day, each month, each year, and read them. No one else can read them for you as you can for yourself. No one else can think exactly as you think, or feel as you feel, or be affected just as you are affected by outer forces or persons about you. And for this reason, no other person can judge what you really need to make your life more complete, more perfect, more happy, so well as yourself. You must find out for yourself what association is best for you, what food is best for you, and what method in any business, any art, any profession brings you the best results. You can be helped very much by conferring with others who are similarly interested. You can be very much helped by those who may have more knowledge than you of general laws. You can be greatly helped to get force or courage or new ideas to carry out your undertakings by meeting at regular intervals with earnest, sincere, and honest people who have also some definite purpose to accomplish, and talking yourself out to them, and they to you. But when you accept any man or any woman as an infallible guide or authority, and do exactly as they say, you are off the main track, because you are then making the experiments of another person, formed of a certain combination of elements or chemicals, and the result of that person's experiments, the rule of your own individual combination of element, when your combination may be very different and differently acted upon by the elements outside of it. You have iron and copper and magnesia and phosphorus, and more of other minerals and chemicals, and combination and recombination of mineral and chemical in your physical body than earthly science has yet thought of. You have in your spirit or thought the unseen or spiritual correspondences of these minerals, still finer and more subtle, and all these are differently combined and in different proportions from any other physical or spiritual body. How, then, can anyone find out the peculiar action of this your individual combination, save yourself? There are certain general laws, but every individual must apply the general law to him or herself. It is a general law that the wind will propel a ship, but every vessel does not use the air in exactly the same fashion. It is a general law that thought is force, and can affect, and is constantly affecting, results to others, far from our bodies, and the quality of our thought and its power to affect results depends very much on our associations. But for that reason, if yours is the superior thought or power, and I see that through its use you are moving ahead in the world, I should not choose your character of associates or your manner of life. I can try your methods as experiments, but I must remember they are only experiments. I must avoid that so common error, the error of slavish copy and idolatry of another. The Christ of Nazareth once bade certain of his followers not to worship him. "Call me not good," said he. "There is none good save God alone." Christ said, "I am the way and the life," meaning, as the text interprets itself to me, that as to certain general laws of which he was aware, and by which he also as a spirit was governed, he knew and could give certain information, but he never did assert that his individual life, with all the human infirmity or defect that he had taken upon him, was to be strictly copied. He did not pray to the infinite Spirit of good for more strength and deliverance from the sin of fear when his spirit quailed at the prospect at his crucifixion, and in so doing he conceded that, as a spirit, powerful as he was, needed help as much as any other spirit, and knowing this, he refused to pose himself before followers of God or the Infinite, but told them that when they desire to bow before the Almighty and never to be comprehended power, out of which comes every good at the prayer or demand of human mind, to worship God alone, God, the eternal and unfathomable moving power of boundless universe, the power that no man has ever seen or ever will see, save as he sees its varying expressions in sun, star, cloud, wind, bird, beast, flower, animal, or in man as the future angel or archangel, and ascending still to grades of mind and grades of power higher and higher still, but ever and ever looking to the source whence comes their power, and never, never worshipping any one form of such expression, and by so doing making the creature greater than the Creator. That power is today working on and in and through every man, woman, and child on this planet. Or to use the biblical expression, it is God working in us and through us. We are all parts of the infinite power, a power ever carrying us up to higher, finer, happier grades of being. Every man or woman, no matter what may be their manner of life or grade of intellect, is a stronger and better man or woman than they ever were before, despite all seeming contradiction. The desire in human nature and all forms of nature, or of spirit expressed through matter, to be more and more refined, is, up to a certain growth of mind, an unconscious desire. The God desire is at work on the lowest drunkard rolling in the gutter. That man's spirit wants to get him out of the gutter. It is at work on the greatest liar, prompting him, if ever so feebly, that the truth is better. It is at work on people you may call despicable and vile. When Christ was asked how often a man should be forgiven any offense, he replied in a manner indicating that there should be no limit to the sum of one man or woman's forgiveness for the defects or immaturity in another. There should be no limit to the kind and helpful thought we think or put out toward another person who falls often, who is struggling with some unnatural appetite. It is a great evil, often done unconsciously, to say or think of an intemperate man, "Oh, he's gone to the dogs, it's no use doing anything more for him," because when we do we put hopeless, discouraging thought in the air. It meets that person, he or she will feel it, and it is to them an element retarding their progress out of the slough they are in, just as some person's similar thought has retarded us in our effort to get out of some slough we were in or are in now, slough of indecision, slough of despondency, slough of ill temper, slough of envious, hating thought. Yet the spirit of man becomes the stronger for all its struggles against. It becomes the stronger for struggling against your censorious, uncharitable thought, until at last it carries a man or woman to a point where they may in thought say to others, "I would rather have your approbation than your censure, but I am not dependent on your approbation or censure, for my most rigid judge and surest punishment for all the evil I do comes of my own mind, the god or goddess in myself, from whose judgment, from whose displeasure, there is no escaping." Yet as the spirit grows clearer and clearer in sight, so does that judge in ourselves become more and more merciful for its own errors, for it knows that, in a sense, as we refine from cruder to finer expression, there must be just so much evil to be contended against, fought against, and finally, and inevitably, overcome. Every man and woman is predestined to a certain amount of defect, until the spirit overcomes such defect, and overcome it must, for it is the nature of spirit to struggle against defect. It is the one thing impossible for man to take this quality out of his own spirit, the quality of ever rising toward more power and happiness. If you make this an excuse to sin, or commit excess, or lie, or steal, or murder, and say, "I can't help it, I'm predestined to it," you will be punished all the same, not possibly by man's law, but by natural or divine law, which has its own punishment for every possible sin, for murder, or lust, or lying, or stealing, or evil thinking, or gluttony, and these punishments are being constantly inflicted, and today thousands on thousands are suffering for sins they commit in ignorance of the law of life, and the pain of such punishment has grown so great and bears so heavily on so many that there is now a greater desire than ever to know more of these laws, and for that very reason is this desire being met, and these questions are being answered, for it is the inevitable law of nature, that what the human mind demands, that in time gets, and the greater number of minds so demanding, the sooner the demand is met and the questions answered. Steam but a few years ago relatively met the demand of human mind for greater speed in travel. Electricity met a demand for greater speed in sending intelligence from man to man. These are but as straws pointing to the discovery and use of greater powers, not only in elements outside of man, but in the unseen elements which make man and woman, and in the elements unseen which make you and me. Henceforth our race will commence to be lifted out of evil or cruder forms of expression, not by fear of the punishments coming through violation of the law, but they will be led to the wiser course through love of the delight which comes of following the law as we discover it for ourselves. You eat moderately because experience has taught that the greater pleasure comes of moderation. You are gentle, kind, and considerate to your friend, not that you have constantly before your mind the fear of losing that friend if you are not kind and considerate, but because it pleases you, and you love the doing of kind acts. Human law, and even divine law, as interpreted by human understanding, have ever been saying in the past, "You must not do this or that, or you'll feel the rod." God has been pictured as a stern, merciless, avenging deity. The burden of the preacher's song has been penalty and punishment, Punishment and penalty. Humanity is to forget all about penalty and punishment, because it is to be won over and tempted to greater goodness, to purity and refinement, by the ever-increasing pleasures brought us as we refine. The warning of penalty was necessary when humanity was cruder. It could only be reached by the rod. The race was blind, and as a necessity of its condition, it had to be kept somewhere near the right path by a succession of painful prods and pokes with a sharp goad of penalty. But when we begin to see clearer, as now the more quickened and sensitive of our race do begin to see, we need no rod, any more than you need a man with a club to prevail on you to go to a feast. End of chapter 9. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 10 of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 10. The Healing and Renewing Force of Spring. Your body is acted on in its growth and changes by the same laws and elements which govern the growth and enter into all other organized bodies, such as trees, plants, birds, and animals. In the early spring of every year there comes and acts on this planet a force from the sun which affects all organized forms of life, trees, birds, animals, and above all, man. Man's being the highest, most complicated, and most powerful mental organism on the planet, absorbs the most of this power, and will absorb far more in the future, and to far greater advantage than at present, as he learns to place himself in the best states to receive it. Material science calls this force heat, but the quality known as heat is only its outward or physical manifestation. The quality known as heat, which comes from the sun, is not converted into heat until it reaches our planet and acts on the earth elements. There is little or no heat a few miles above the earth's surface. Were this force in the form of heat on leaving the sun or during its passage, the air on the mountain tops would be as warm as that of the valleys. As we know, on the highest peaks snow and ice are perpetual, for the sun force at such elevation is not sufficiently mingled with earth elements to convert it into that degree of heat felt in valleys and plains. This force causes the increased movement and circulation of sap in the trees, which commences as soon as the sun of the new year acts on them. The sap is a new life to the tree, from which later comes its buds, blossoms, and fruitage. The inflowing of this unseen sun force gives the tree power to draw new supplies of nourishing elements through its roots from the earth. It gives it power also to cast off any dead leaves remaining of the last year's crop, which have hung on during the winter, as you may see in forests of oak or hickory. This force acts also in the later winter and early spring months on animals and birds, especially if in their wild or natural state, causing them to shed last year's coats of fur or feathers. But this casting off of old visible matter is but a relatively small part of the change going on within them. There is also a casting out or shedding of old invisible matter throughout the bird or animal's entire body. It goes off through the pores or other passages in various forms, some visible, some invisible, and is succeeded by new elements within, as the new fur, hair, or feather is grown without. Your body is governed by the same law. During the late winter and early spring months you are molting. You are casting off old, dead matter and taking in new, providing you give this force opportunity to act on you to the best advantage, by ceasing to be active either with mind or body when they call for rest, as do birds and animals during their molting period, or process of casting off the old elements and receiving the new. This element or force received at this time by you and them is invisible to the physical eye, as all force is invisible. The new fur, the new plumage of the bird, the new skin and tissues without and within your body, if received, the new buds, leaves, and twigs, are all materialized expressions of this force. They are new crystallizations coming of a new solution of invisible chemicals, in which bird, animal, tree, and your body are bathed. All of last year's solution or elements so absorbed have been used up. The tree or other visible organization of bird, animal, or your body stands in the same relation to this reclothing solution as does the slip of metal in the solution of mineral, which attracts out of such solution the crystallizations which form on it. There is no great dividing line betwixt what we call matter and spirit. Matter is but a form of spirit, or thought seen of the physical eye. Matter is force temporarily materialized, as in the lump of coal, which when set on fire, sends off the force bound up in it to move the engine. The lump passes then mostly into elements invisible. So all about us we find force ever passing from physical visibility into invisibility, and vice versa. Millions on millions of tons of invisible matter may be on a clear day suspended over our heads 1 hour, the next to fall in the visible form of rain or snow, which a few hours after may be drawn upward again, but invisible. The Indian called February and March the weak months, recognizing, as he did, being a closer observer of nature than we, the tendency to sluggishness and inactivity in animal and man, which always prevails when this power is recuperating and renewing any organized body. The most perfect crystallizations out of mineral element come of the solution kept most free from agitation. Your body is governed by the same law in this spring, renewing and recrystallizing of its elements. To receive the fullest benefit of the heating and renewing element of spring, you should rest whenever you feel like resting, whether it be the middle of the day or the middle of the night. If you keep the body or mind at work against their inclination, if you force your muscles to exertion through mere strength of will, if you work with either mind or body to the verge of utter exhaustion, not knowing how depleted you are of strength until your work is over, as thousands on thousands are compelled to do, through our unnatural system of life and the arbitrary demands of business, you prevent this healing and recuperative power from acting to its fullest extent on the body. You prevent the new element, which is renewing the tree and causing the buds to swell, from assimilating with your body. You hold on to worn-out element which should be cast off, as the oak has cast all its dead leaves before the winter is over. You carry, then, this dead element, a dead weight, about you, instead of the new and upward rising life. It is this, among other causes, which stoops the shoulders, bleaches the hair, and furrows the face with wrinkles, through shrinkage of tissues. The decay of the physical body, which we call old age, is owing entirely to man's neither believing nor knowing that he can place himself in the proper conditions to receive a never-ceasing supply of force, which would reclothe the spirit constantly with new material. Mere muscular strength and constant activity of body are not always signs of the most perfect health. In the delirium of fever, a relatively weak man may require 2 or 3 others to hold him. When this delirium has passed away, he is as weak as an infant, yet often, the crisis being past, is pronounced out of danger. In a manner somewhat similar in the walks of business, in the keen, almost fierce competition of trade, thousands of people lead a feverish, excited life. They are always on attention. They demand to be in this state. They cannot work unless strung up to a certain pitch. If, at times, through nature's own demand for rest, their nerves are relaxed, they mistake this friendly signal for some form of disease, and treat it accordingly. Even in these cases, when laid for weeks or months on sick beds, and nursed through what is called a dangerous illness, and believing it to be one, they sometimes come out at last better and stronger than they had been for a long period previous. Why? Because through this enforced cessation from physical or mental activity, nature was working as well as she could under certain unfavorable circumstances, rebuilding a worn-out body, and as a result, the man arose with new, fresh element in his bones, muscles, and nerves, put there because nature had then his body laid up in quiet, so that it could be repaired. If you will but entertain this idea of spring's renewing force respectfully, though you cannot believe it thoroughly at first, you will receive much help by such respectful entertainment, for if you do not kick a live truth out of your mind when it first presents itself, it will take root and live there, and prove itself by doing you good. Men, through incessant physical toil, wear out far sooner than is generally realized. The sailor's hardiness often lasts but a few years. He is often an old man at 45. The toiling farmer who works the year round from early dawn till dark and thinks work to be the greatest virtue in the world is often a mass of bony knobs and rheumatism at 50. The average duration of lives of hard labor is much less than those given to occupations requiring less physical lugging, straining, and fagging, hour after hour, when the body is really exhausted. In the mines of California, where I swung a pick for years and worked with gangs of men, lifting, wheeling, and shoveling, I noted that the last 3 hours of a day's work of 10, sometimes 12 hours in length, was done by the men, strong as they might be, with far less spirit than the earlier day's labor. In fact, it was often a mere pretense of work, unless the watchful eye of the boss was constantly on his men. Why? Because physically they were no longer fit to work. It was only will that was urging muscle to exertion. And of the stout, hardy miners, aged 25 or thereabout, who were so working in, and who so persisted in such drudgery, a large majority are dead, and of those who are alive today, 4/5 are broken-down men. In the kingdom of nature we find periods of rest, constantly alternating with periods of activity. Trees rest during the winter. The circulation of sap is sluggish. There is no creation of leaf, blossom, or fruit. Wild birds and animals after the summer breeding season do little save eat and sleep. Some animals and reptiles sleep during the entire winter. Even soil must rest to bring the best crop. When it is forced, through constant artificial fertilization, the product is inferior in flavor and nourishing quality to that raised on virgin soil. Disease, blight, and destructive insects some unknown to vegetation in its natural state. When man recognizes the fact that he cannot use his body year after year, from the budding strength of youth to the age of 40 or 50, under such a full, unceasing pressure of nerve or willpower, without great injury, and when he does recognize the fact that through placing himself oftener in restful and receptive states, as do tree, bird, and animal in their natural state, he will then, through receiving far more of this element, enjoy a far greater health of body, elasticity of muscle, vigor and brilliancy of mind. He would also have other senses and powers awakened within him, whose existence is still doubted by most people. Some Oriental and Indian races have, to an extent, the use of these senses and powers, partly by reason of their more restful lives, and their living like tree and animal, more in conformity to the influence on them of the seasons. They have not our domineering aggressive force, which invades and conquers for a time, as England has conquered India, and our own people have subdued and almost exterminated the Indian. But mark, this force does not conquer in the end. The thought power, which works most while the body is relatively inactive, is really the strongest and ultimately prevails. It is subtle, noiseless, unseen. Working with the highest motive, it refines and polishes the rude, warlike, conquering races by grafting on them the civilization of the conquered. In such manner was the art and civilization of conquered Egypt transferred to the Assyrian. Centuries afterward, the conquered Assyrian transformed his power to conquering Greece. Greece fell before Rome, yet Greece civilization held sway in Rome. Rome fell physically before the Goths and the Vandals, and then savage races of northern Europe, but in the kingdom of mind it is the influence of ancient Italy which has been the great factor in refining the Goth, Hun, and Vandal ages long ago into the modern German, Frenchman, Spaniard, and Italian. Every convulsion, agitation, and conquest has made this power take root on a wider field. Today, the best English mind is seriously studying the laws which at last it has recognized in India, and that force is in a sense to subdue England, for she is already sitting at the feet of India, receiving her first lessons in the alphabet of laws and force, hitherto quite unrecognized by her learned men. What power is this, you ask? How gained? How developed? It is the power coming of minds united on one purpose, in perfect concord, and who do not use it at all in physical activity. For if you put all your thought or force into working of the members of your body, and working with your hands at any calling, day in and day out, year in and year out, with no regard to the impulses and instincts of time or seasons, you keep all that force working merely in the instrument, the body, and wearing it out. You prevent it from operating at a distance from the body. You prevent also the inflowing and assimilation of this recuperative power of spring. You breed the habit of keeping the body always in motion. You prevent yourself from getting that order of sleep which would bring your body the most strength for the waking hours. For if the body or mind is fagged out day after day, the same order of thought prevails and is fagging it out by night. You breed the belief and error that you are accomplishing nothing unless at work with body or brain. You cannot get into that state of repose when your thought power could work at a distance and apart from your body, and bring you in time 100-fold more beneficial result than can ever be realized through mere physical exertion. The quality in the plant's leaf, root, or berry, which, when taken as medicine, acts on the internal organs, is the force in that plant liberated through the digestive process. The strength you get from bread or meat is force liberated from the food in the same manner. Digestion is a slow burning up of the material taken in the body, as coal is burned up in the boiler, and the force freed by such burning you use to work the body as the engineer uses heat to run the engine. The newer the bud, the more tender is its outward material formation, yet that bud contains the most active force, principle, and quality of the plant. The choicest and strongest tea is made of the topmost and tenderest buds of the plant. In California, the bud of the poison oak affects some people, though they only stand near it. So great is its injurious force it sends out in the air. The tender buds of spring contain that force, which later on will make the more solid leaf or branch. In your own organization in the spring are the same tender budding elements. So if your body is weak in the spring, it is a sign that the new buds, so to speak, within you are forming. They are in full force, but that force has not had time to act on your material organization and form the new bone, muscle, and sinew, which will come at a later period, providing such budding or new crystallization not be agitated, disturbed, and possibly destroyed by undue exertion of the mind or body, where the same relative damage is done your body as would be done the budding tree by a hurricane. Possibly you say, but how can I carry on my business and earn my bread if I so lay my body up for nature's repairs? We answer, the laws of man's business are not the laws of nature. If nature says rest and man says work, and will work or must work, man always gets the worst of it. What society calls vicious practices or habits are not the only agencies which bring disease, pain, and death. Thousands perish annually in lingering agony on respectable beds and in the best society. Consumption, cancer, insanity, dropsy, rheumatism, fevers, rage, are ever raging among the most correct people from the conventional standpoint. Why is this? If you are in conditions of life where at present it is impossible to give yourself needed rest, and you feel thoroughly the need of such rest, you may rely upon it that your persistent desire, your prayer, your imperious demand that you shall have opportunity to receive and profit by nature's restoring forces, will bring you in some way the opportunity to so profit by them. When any need is thoroughly felt, the thought and desire coming of such feeling is itself a prayer, a force that will bring you helps and take you out of injurious surrounding and modes of life. We repeat this assertion often. It needs frequent repetition. It is the mainspring of all growth and advance into a happier and more healthful life. The Christ of Judea embodied this great law in the words, "Ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you." He wisely made no attempt to explain this mystery, whereby earnest human thought, desire, or aspiration always in time brings the thing or result desired. For this and other mysteries are inexplicable, and so fast as any alleged cause is given for any certain result in nature's workings, do we find a deeper mystery in the very cause. We say, wind is air in motion. What sets it in motion and keeps it in motion? Once we explained the tides on the theory of the moon's attraction, but apart from the tides, what power keeps in motion the gigantic system of currents ever traversing the oceans, revealed more fully during the last 40 years? What power keeps our lungs breathing day and night, or the blood running to every part of our body? Are not all of these the power of God, or the infinite spirit or force of good, working within you as it works in everything that lives and grows? Only to us is at last given the knowledge to work this power intelligently. The body of tree, animal, and bird decays at last, through lack of such intelligence. So in the past, has man's material part decayed? But this is not always to be. The last great enemy to be destroyed, says Paul, is death, implying that as man's knowledge and faith in the wonderful forces about him and in him increased, he would discover better and better how to place himself in the line of the working of these forces, and in so doing make the mortal part immortal through incessant renewal of finer and finer elements. End of chapter 10. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 11 of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 11. Immortality in the Flesh. We believe that immortality in the flesh is a possibility, or in other words, that a physical body can be retained so long as the spirit desires its use, and that these bodies, instead of decreasing in strength and vigor as the years go on, will increase, and its youth will be perpetual. We believe that the reputed fables in the ancient mythologies referring to the immortals, or beings possessed of powers other and greater than mortals, have a foundation in fact. This possibility must come in accordance with the law that every demand or prayer of humanity must bring supply. There is now a more earnest demand than ever for longer and more perfect physical life, because now more minds see the greater possibilities of life. They appreciate more and more the value of living in the physical. Such demand often takes the form of expression, "I have just learned how to live, and it is nearly time for me to die." The body will grow to these results through the gradual series of spiritual processes, operating on and ever changing, spiritualizing and refining the material. These processes do not retain the body a person may have now. They retain a body, an ever-changing and refining body. All disease, lack of physical ease, or sickness comes of a spiritual process, the aim of which is reconstruction of the physical body, first in the receiving of new elements, and second in the casting out of old ones. Back of this physical reconstruction, however, there is going on the far more important reconstruction of the spirit, out of which is built the body. These processes are continually going on with the body, operating through the skin, the stomach, and other organs, as well as in the periods of physical prostration or indisposition above referred to. All sickness is an effort of the spirit, renewed by fresh influx of force, to cast off old and relatively dead matter. But as this intent has not been recognized by the race, the spiritual process or effort with its accompanying pain and discomfort has been held and feared as a signal or approach of death. So with knowledge of spiritual law, and judging everything by the material, the temporary and necessary weaknesses of body accompanying the process has been considered an unmitigated ill. Such belief has in the past only aided the spirit to pile on itself more and more of belief in the untruth that after a certain term of years no power or force in the universe could prevent the physical body from aging, shriveling, weakening, and finally perishing. The body is continually changing its element in accordance with the condition of the mind. In certain mental conditions it is adding to itself elements of decay, weakness, or physical death. In other mental condition, it is adding to itself elements of strength, life, and perpetual life. That which the spirit takes on in either case are thoughts or beliefs. Thoughts and beliefs materialize themselves in flesh and blood. Belief in inevitable decay and death brings from the spirit to the body the elements of decay and death. Belief in the possibility of an ever-coming inflowing to the spirit of life brings new life. If new life is being thus added to you, there must also be an accompanying of throwing off of the old, relatively dead matter of the body. Just as when an influx of new life comes to the tree, in the spring it casts off the dead leaves which may have clung to it all winter. Through similar inflowing of new life or force does the animal and bird shed the old fur or feathers and take on the new and correspondent changes that take place throughout the whole organization of bird, animal, and man. This spiritual law works in all forms and organizations of the cruder form of spirit we call matter. In the human being this influx of force is greater than in the lower forms of life. It does not flow equally to all human beings. Some receive it more than others. But in the course of advancement, men and women are to come who will receive so much of this influx as to be obliged to see these further possibilities of existence, and also to realize them. When new ideas and thoughts are received by our higher mind or self, they are warred against by our lower or material mind. The body is the battleground between these two forces, and therefore suffers. As minds come to trust even to a small extent in the supreme power and entertain the idea that physical disease and physical death are not absolute necessities, the higher power must prevail. Some old error will be cast out, some new idea will come to stay, the body will be better and stronger after each succeeding struggle, and these struggles will gradually become less and less severe until they cease altogether. People have in the past lost their physical bodies because, being in ignorance of the fact that sickness is a process for the spirit to throw off the old material thought and take on new, they have used their forces in the wrong way to retain such thought. They retain it by their belief. Your belief will make your sickness a benefit or an evil to you. If you can but entertain the belief that it is a spiritual process of getting rid of old worn-out elements, you assist greatly the mind in the performance of this process. If, however, you believe that sickness is entirely a physical condition, and that no benefit and only evil can come of it, you are using force only to load down the spirit with more and more error, of which your flesh and blood will be in quality and expression, until at last your spirit rejects the body it has been trying to carry and drops its burden. It rejects at last the whole body through the same laws by which it rejects a part of it when that part is spiritually dead. If you receive with scorn the thought that your physical body, through fresher and fresher renewal of its substance, can be made perpetual, you close yourself an entrance for life, and open another for decay and death. We do not argue you ought to believe this. You may be so mentally constituted that you cannot now believe it. There are many things to be in the future, which none of us now have the power to believe. But we can, if the thing deemed impossible be desirable, pray or demand a faith which shall give us a reason for believing, and such faith will come in response to demand. Faith means power to believe in the true, or the capacity for the mind to receive true thoughts. The faith of Columbus in the existence of a new continent was a power in him to entertain such idea greater than others of his time. People who use the common expression, have faith in themselves, have also an actual power for carrying out their undertakings greater than those who have no faith in themselves. When you demand faith in possibilities for yourself that now seem new and strange, you demand, also, the power and ability to draw to you the capacity to see or feel reasons for truths new to you. If you demand persistently the truth and only the truth, you will get it, and the whole truth means power to accomplish seeming impossibilities. Thy faith hath made thee whole, said the Christ of Judea to a man who was healed. To us, this passage interprets itself as meaning that the person healed had an innate power of believing that he could not be healed. This power, which was of his own spirit, and not of Christ's, so acted on his body as instantly to cure his infirmities. Christ was a means of awakening this power in that man's spirit, but Christ himself did not give the person that power. It was latent in the person healed. Christ woke it into life, and probably only temporary life and activity, for we do not hear that any of the recorded cases of sudden healing in those times were permanent. They fell sick again and finally lost their bodies. Why? Because the faith or power they drew to themselves for a brief time did not come to stay. They had not learned to increase it continually through the silent demand of the supreme power. Their spirits went back into the domain of material belief. When that belief again materialized, a load on the spirit hard to carry, and they were sick, not one was at hand like the Christ to awaken it into a temporary faith or power. No person can become permanently whole, which implies among other powers, immortality in the flesh, and have entire and permanent freedom from disease, who is ever trusting or leaning on any other save the Supreme to gain the power of faith. In this respect, every mind must stand entirely alone. You cannot draw the highest power if you depend always for help from another or others. If you do, you are only borrowing or absorbing their faith. Such borrowed faith may work wonders for a time, but it does not come to stay. When that of which you borrow is cut off, you will fall into the slough of despond and disease again. You had never really drawn from the right source, the Supreme. Our most profitable demand or prayer, made consciously or unconsciously, is let my faith be ever increased. When you reverse your mental attitude regarding sickness, and do but entertain the belief that it is an effort of the spirit to throw off errors in thought which as absorbed and received from earliest infancy are materialized in your flesh, you gradually cease to load up with error. You commence also the process of unloading and casting out all former errors in thought. The sickness you had many years ago in fear of death has in a sense packed away that particular remembrance of such mood of fear in your being, and with it the belief that accompanied such remembrance. That belief has been working against you all these years, as all wrong belief must work against you. It is literally a part of your real being, as all past individual remembrances and experiences are a literal part of our beings. It is retained in your spirit memory, although its material remembrance may have faded out. That remembrance is in thought a reality, but it is the remembrance of a false belief, teaching that death and decay can never be overcome. This belief, the reversed action and state of your mind will cast out, but such casting out must have a correspondent expression in the flesh. The physical expressions of all your former coughs and colds, fevers, and other illness must reappear, at first possibly severe, but gradually in a modified form. You are then unloading your old false beliefs. But if your belief is not reversed and you go on as before, regarding physical decay and death as inevitable, then with every illness and such mental condition, you pack away another error, another untruth, and another addition to the load of untruths, whose certain effect, added to the rest, is to weaken, crush, and finally cause the body to perish. There is no period in physical life too late for receiving or entertaining the truth. There is no period too late for such truth to commence its process of physical renewal, and though that particular physical life may not be perpetuated, yet the spirit in receiving such truth receives a force which will be of priceless value to it on the unseen side, and by its aid it may be able the sooner to build for itself a more perfect spiritual body, and the ultimate of the relatively perfected spiritual body is the power to be and live in the physical and spiritual realms of existence at will. If you hold on to the idea that mankind are always to go on as in the past, losing their bodies, and are also to remain without the power to keep those bodies in perfect health, then you set your belief against the eternal fact that all things in this planet are ever moving forward to greater refinement, greater powers, and greater possibilities. Medicine and material remedies may greatly assist the throwing off process. A skilled and sympathetic physician of any school may be of much assistance. Everything depends on the mind and belief in which you take the medicine and the physician's advice. If you regard both as aids to your spirit in throwing off a load and building for you a new body, you give in such belief great help to the spirit, so to throw off and build. But if you regard both medicine and physician as aids only to the body, and a body also which you hold must at best weaken and perish sometime during the next 30, 40, or 50 years, you will load up with the belief in error faster than you cast it off, and the load becomes at last too heavy for the spirit to carry. What causes the man or woman to be bowed down by age? What causes the stooping shoulders, the weakened knees, and the tottering gait? Because they believe only in the earthly and perishable. The spirit is neither earthly nor perishable, but you can load it down literally with an earthly quality of thought, which will bow it down toward the earth with such burden. It is not the physical body of the old person that is bent and bowed down. It is that part which is the force moving the body, that is, his or her spirit loaded with material thought, which cannot appropriate or assimilate, which becomes so bent, bowed, and weak. The body is always an external correspondence of your mind or spirit. A body thus ever renewing, beautifying, freshening, and strengthening means a mind behind it ever renewing with new ideas, plans, hope, purpose, and aspiration. Life eternal is not the half-dead life of extreme old age. The person who can see only the physical side and temporary expression of life, who eats and drinks in the belief that only the body is affected by less eating and drinking, who believes that the body is sustained only by a force generated within itself, and that it is not fed of an unseen element coming from the spiritual realm of element, and who believes that nothing exists but what he can see, hear, and feel with the physical sense, that is, the material which is always the temporary and perishable, draws to himself mostly those forces and elements which cause the temporary and perishable, and these acting in his body make it temporary and perishable. Death of the body begins with thousands, many years before they are in their coffins. The pale face, the parchment-colored skin, means a half-dead skin. It means a portion of the body on which the spirit works the casting out process of dead element, and taking on of the new, very imperfectly. In the freshness of infancy and early youth, the spirit cast out and took on more vigorously. As years went on, untruth was absorbed by the spirit. Its growth in knowledge was more and more retarded. Responding physical changes became slower and slower. The body commences to show signs of age, that is, to die, because such spirit was less and less fed of that element which brings constant renewal of new thought, which is new life. So far does the belief and faith in weakness and decay prevail with the race that wisdom is often allegorically portrayed as an old man, gray, bald-headed, bowed and sustained by a staff. That means a wisdom which cannot prevent its own body from falling to pieces. In that form of being we call the child, a spirit or mind having come in possession of a new body, there is for a period a greater spiritual wisdom than when the child is physically more matured. It is the unconscious wisdom of intuition. It is for a time more open to the truth. For such reason, up to the age of 18 or 20, the spiritual casting off and taking on processes with the body are more perfectly performed. These relatively rapid changes in the physical maintain the bloom and freshness of youth. Sooner or later, however, the higher spiritual process ceases gradually to operate. Beliefs in the false, as taught or absorbed by others, materialize themselves in the body, despite all the resistance of the higher mind as expressed in pain and sickness. The load of belief in the earthly and perishable accumulates. The body assumes an appearance in correspondence with such thought, At last the higher mind refuses longer to carry such a burden, flings it off, and leaves a dead body. The death of the body is then the final process for casting off cruder element from the spirit which it can no longer use or appropriate. But it is very desirable for the spirit to be able to keep a physical body which shall refine as the spirit refines, because in such equality of refinement between the spirit and its instrument our increase in happiness is greatly advanced, and the relatively perfected rounding out of our powers cannot be realized until this union between spirit and body is effected. When the Christ of Judea said to the elders of Israel of the little child, "Except ye become as this child, ye cannot enter the kingdom of heaven," he meant, as the text interprets itself to us, that they should become as open to that inflowing of force as that spirit, the child, was at that period of its existence. Were such influx maintained, the youth of the body would be perpetual. The child is more led of the spirit than the grown-up person. It is more natural. It discards policy. It shows openly whom it likes and whom it does not. It has more intuition. It will dislike a bad man or a bad woman when its parents see no evil in that person. It knows, or rather feels, far more regarding life than its parents give it credit for. But it cannot voice its thoughts in words, yet the thoughts are still there. It has not learned to train itself to the double-faced custom of the world which smiles in your face and sneers behind your back. It is relatively natural. Its spirit for a time gives itself free expression. When the spirit loses this freedom of expression, when we pretend what we are not, when we say yes outwardly and think no inwardly, when we court only to gain a favor, when we feel anger or disappointment or irritation within and pretend content and happiness without, we become more and more unnatural in all tastes and desires. We blunt and for a time destroy all the higher spiritual senses and powers. We become unable to distinguish truth from falsehood. We are unable to feel spiritually what faith means, much less to draw this great and indispensable power to us. And without this drawing power, the physical body must be cast off by the spirit. The body in dying does not give up the ghost. It is the ghost, the spirit, that rejects the material body. Its spirit, through casting off unbelief, becomes more and more accessible to thoughts and things that are true, and therefore grows to more and more power. It will, acting in all parts and functions of the body, operate the casting off process more and more quickly, as it does in the material youth. It will refuse or reject, through the physical senses of touch or taste, anything which would injure or adulterate it. It can attain to such power that an active poison, if accidentally placed in its mouth, would be instantly detected and rejected, or if swallowed, would be instantly cast from the stomach. It is not the physical stomach which rejects food unfit for it or casts out the nauseous dose. It is the spirit which moves the organ to such action through a knowledge of its own that the cast-out substance is unfit for it. It is so unfit because there is no spirit nor quality in the rejected element which can assimilate with and help the spirit. As your spirit grows in power, this sensitiveness to all things which can do it evil, be they of the seen or unseen world of things, will increase. It grows keener and keener to the approach or presence of everything evil and casts it off. It will warn you instantly of the evil or designing person. It will tell you what is safe and fit for your association. It will at last cast out or refuse to receive all evil thoughts which now you may daily receive unconsciously, and which may work more harm than anything material can do, for by them the spirit is poisoned. As faith increases, many material aids will be called in by the spirit which will greatly help the renewing process. These aids will come in the selection of foods, in choosing proper associations, and other changes of habit and custom. But it is the spirit which must prompt and direct these material aids. When such prompting comes, you will be obliged to follow it. The food to be avoided you will not be able to eat. Your taste will reject it. the association injurious to you, you will not be able to keep company with. The habit to be changed will drop off easily and naturally. But if you make any rigid rules for yourself in these matters, in the hope they will tend to spiritualize you, you are allowing the material self to take the matter in hand. The material, or lower mind, is then trying to give the rule and law and refine the spiritual, or higher self. Let the spirit increased in faith do the work, and when the time comes for you to reject any animal food or any of the grosser element in any form, the desire and relish for these will have gone. In stating our belief that immortality in the flesh is a possibility, we do not infer that it is one which will any now physically alive may realize. Neither do we infer it is one they cannot realize, nor do we argue that people should immediately set to work in any material sense in order to live forever. We hold only that it is one result which must come sooner or later of that spirit evolution or growth from the cruder to the finer, which has always been operating on this planet and on every form of matter. Matter is spirit temporarily materialized so as to be evident to correspondent physical sense. As we grow in faith of these spiritual processes for casting out the old and taking in the new, and consequently realize the accompanying greater refinement or spiritualization of the body, we shall aid more and more those who are nearest us in the unseen side of life. For as we become more spiritualized in the flesh, they are helped to materialize more of the spirit. In other words, we shall become physically tangible, each to the other, because in the material thought we cast off, there exists an element which they can appropriate to make themselves more material. Their spiritual bodies are also under the same laws as regards the throwing off and taking on process. What they throw off as coarser to them is the finer and fit for us. This element we spiritually absorb. It is for the time and condition, a certain spiritual food and life for us. Through what they throw off we are aided to spiritualize the body. Through what we throw off, they are aided to materialize the spirit. End of chapter 11. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 12 of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 12. The Attraction of Aspiration. Why may we not maintain a level of serenity of mind? Why are we so subject to periods of depression? It is because, no matter how well positioned you are in accord with your ideal of living, you are still to a greater or less degree affected by the discordance which reigns about you. Are you gentle and humane toward the animal creation, the wild birds, your free pets, who come and build their nests in the grove, are murdered for sport or gain before your eyes, and you are quite helpless to prevent it? You live amid a scene of incessant cruelty and slaughter. The animals fostered by man's care are bred under artificial conditions, and thereby developed into unnatural and really unhealthy growths for his amusement or profit. This refers to all manner of fancy breeding. Nature, when left alone, does its best for bird or animal, and the birds or animals have their individual rights, as well as man. A strained and morbid taste will grow an enlarged and diseased liver in a goose, to make thereof a certain dish. Your race are so growing disease all about you. Disease means mental as well as physical unhappiness. Directly and indirectly, this unhappiness affects you. The finer your organization, and the more open is it to a finer life, the more easily annoyed it is here by the many ills about it. You can hardly go abroad without suffering mental or physical pain. Your houses, cars, and boats in winter are overheated and full of noxious vapors from the fuel used, as well as emanation from the human bodies packed in them. You may be obliged to sleep in rooms where this unhealthy heat is partly relied on to warm you when at rest. You must breathe it when in the unconscious state of recuperation, and awake with it incorporated into your being. You are liable to eat staleness and decay at the best of your public tables. You are pained by scenes of cruelty, brutality, and injustice. That is the predominant thought active in the atmosphere of the crowd, and it affects your thought. There is thought, or if you please so to call it, mental action, embodied in every material thing about you, and the brightness or darkness of the thought depends on the condition of the material thing. The eating of stale fruit or vegetables may indirectly give you the blues. The live, fresh fruit gives you life. Decay is the disorganization of matter. You want to feed on the perfect organization, neither over nor underripe. You want it, if possible, when the article fed upon is at its fullest stage of life, so that you may receive that life. You violate ignorantly, unconsciously, and even for the time, unnecessarily, many laws of physical and mental health. Relative to food, air, warmth, as spoken above, you may always have been dependent on artificial props. You were born so dependent. You may have come into the world with a body, the partial development of artificial and improper food, and an artificial life brought down to you through the blood of many generations. This artificial life must in some way bring pain. Your alcoholic stimulant brightens for the moment, but leaves a much longer period of pain behind it. But the evil of alcohol is really small as compared with scores of causes for human ills in daily active operation about you in places crowded with people, and all the more dangerous from becoming quite unknown. You ask, why even in solitude you cannot maintain a certain evenness and serenity of mind of which you realize sufficient to long for? Assuming that in the past you have been diseased physically, and of course mentally, do you expect to be instantly cured of such a long illness? Certain habits of thought cannot be otherwise than gradually removed. So with certain habits of body, consequent on such habits of thought, such as the habit of hurry, the habit of worry, the habit of laying undue stress on things not the most needful for the hour, the habit of trouble borrowing, and many others which permeate and influence every act of life. Their combined effect is exhaustion, and exhaustion is the real mother of most of the ills flesh is heir to. Whatever exhausts the body, be the motive for effort of good or ill, benevolence or selfishness, lessens the power to resist these many causes for pain and consequent depression of spirits. So long as earthiness or grosser spirit has the ascendancy, we see mostly on the earthly side. We sense mostly the repulsive in the individual. We are slow to see the good. We can like but few. We dislike many. But when spirit gains the ascendancy, this is reversed. We see then clearly the good in all. We are thereby attracted more or less to all. And as we find the good in all, we get good from all. We cease then to be so strongly repelled by individual prejudices. We love more than we hate. While earthiness prevails, we hate more than we love. We see more to loathe and detest than to admire. We are blinded to the good and too sensitive to the evil. Seeing and feeling then more of evil than good, we are injured by it. To hate, to be strongly prejudiced, to be unable to hear mention of the loathed person's name without the thrill of indignation or disgust, is to be continually inflicting wounds on self. To be able to admire, to have the clear sight to detect the good in the lowest nature and to keep the evil out of sight, is a source to us of strength, of health, of continual increase of power. Love is power. You are always the stronger when in a condition of admiration. Attraction is the law of heaven. Repulsion is that of earth. Spirituality is attracted to what it finds of itself anywhere. It sees the diamond in the rough, though embedded in the coarsest mold. It sees the germ of superior quality in the coarsest nature. It can fix its eye on that germ and hide from itself the coarser elements. In so doing, it throws its power on that germ and warms it into life. The basest nature mounts to its highest level in the presence and under the influence of the higher. There is little need for the true missionary to preach in words. He or she exhales an atmosphere of divinity which is felt by all. Precepts need to be felt more than heard. The prejudice against the sinner is only a spiritual porcupine. He stings all he touches. So long as we feel that strong repulsion through seeing only the defects in another, so long are we ruled by such sentiment. We are in fetters. We are in his or her presence so full of hatred as to be unable to assert the better part of ourselves. All our own evil is called out and comes to the front. There is only the clashing of opposing wills. In such case we, though in reality the more powerful party, become the weaker for the time being. We are obliged to allow the pupil, whom we should teach by example, to domineer over us. Cynicism is born of repulsion, and personal prejudice carried to extreme. The cynic ends by finding everybody unbearable, and at last hates himself. No cynic was ever in good health. Cynicism is blood poisoning. The cynic is ever hunting for the ideal without. He should find it within. This once found would be ever creating ideals from all without. His own loving spirit would graft and build itself, or all with whom he came in contact. Divinity is also contagious. That would be a poor divine plan which allowed only evil to be infectious. Goodness is catching. In good time the world will learn that health is also. But hitherto mankind have so much feared and even admired the devil as to have accredited evil only with inoculating quality, while all manner of good is supposed to be drilled into poor human nature by painful and laborious processes. There cannot be the highest health and vigor without aspiration and purity of thought. Pure thought brings the purest blood. Impure thought, despondent, hopeless, repining, fault-finding, fretful, slanderless thought, is certain to make the blood impure and fill the system with disease. Without aspiration, your best care for the body will be relatively of little help. You may, as to garb and person, be scrupulously clean. You may pay the utmost attention to diet. Yet after all, you are but cleaning the outside of a vessel, which within is ever filling up with uncleanliness. With an ever-increasing purity of thought, cleanliness and care for the body will come as a natural result. The vessel will clean itself. Proper care for the body in all respects will be a loving effort for that body. Bathing will not be an enforced task, but a recreation. Diet will be regulated by the natural demand of appetite. Taste or relish will be the standard for acceptance or rejection. Excess will be impossible, so watchful will be the healthy palate to regard the first faint sign of sufficiency as the signal to cease any kind of indulgence. It is this aspiration for the highest and best that in time causes an actual new birth of the body, a total reformation throughout in the quality and composition of flesh, bone, blood, muscle, and sinews, a change in the material organization corresponding with that of the spiritual. The flesh by it is spiritualized, that is, made up of finer elements. In all aspiring minds is this process going on. The rule of spirit over flesh brings perfect immunity from disease, intensifies every power, gives far greater capacity for effect in any field, and at the close of the earth life ensures a painless passing out of spirit, a simple falling to sleep of the earthly body, and a waking up on the other, the spiritual side of life. The path of self-healing lies in the calling for the elements of health and strength to drive out disease. That is, you pray for such elements, and they come to you. Strength or vigor is an element of spirit or more refined matter. The more often is your will exercised in praying for it, the quicker it will come. This is the secret for the perpetual maintenance and increase of vigor or any other desired quality. When sensible, by signs quickly detected, of lack of power, call, pray, desire more. Its rapport with these elements causes such power immediately to flow in upon it. You may become weary. Your will put thus in operation causes an immediate influx of strength, as soon as it places itself in certain conditions for such inflowing. Say you arise in the morning weak, languid, with no physical or mental energy. Keep your mind as much as you can from dwelling on your ailment. Keep it as much as you can on the thought of strength, vigor, health, activity. As aids to erect this frame of mind, fix it as much as you can on illustrations and symbols of nature's force and power, on storm and tempest, on the heaving billow and majesty of the ocean, on the morning sun, rising in all his glory to refresh and invigorate man, animal, and vegetation. If there be in prose or poetry any illustrations of this character which affect you strongly, recur to them, read them, aloud or in silence, because in so doing you are setting the mind in the right direction to receive strength. In brief, think of strength and power, and you will draw it to you. Think of health, and you will get it. Let your mind dwell on weakness, on never getting well, on the dark side, on everything of discouragement, gloom, and darkness, and you draw to you the contrary and hurtful elements. As decay attracts and generates decay in the things we see, so does any weak, decaying order of thought attract its like of the things we do not see. Unconsciously, many sick and ailing people nurse their complaints more than they nurse the bodies carrying such complaints. They are always thinking of them and talking of them. They actually crave sympathy for the hurt more than the body afflicted with it. And the sympathy so brought out from surrounding friends actually nourishes the injury and increases the ailment, when the thought of patient and friend should be placed on a strong, healthy body for the patient. The more of such thought concentrated on the patient from those about him or her, the more of drawing power you have to bring vigor to the one afflicted. Bear in mind, it is not here argued that such relief can always be immediate. A mind long unconsciously set in the opposite direction of dwelling on self-weakness cannot immediately reverse its movement and set itself in the contrary and strength-drawing direction. It may have become so habituated and trained to dwell on the dark side as to be almost unable to fix itself on any other. But as the attempt is made and persisted in, more and more power will come to put it in the desired strength-attracting frame. The effort must be made. It may take time, but every atom of effort so made is an accretion of strength which can never be lost. Do not demand arbitrarily or despotically that any member of your body get well of a hurt, that any organ or function become stronger. Your body is, as a whole, an individual separate from your spirit and with a peculiar physical life of its own. As a whole, it is an organization made up of a number of other organizations, each charged with a specific duty, as the eye to see, the ear to hear, the tongue to taste, the stomach to digest, the lungs to breathe. All of these are, in a sense, individual organizations. Each is open to the enlivening, cheering effect upon it of the element called love, and that element you can send it. Bandage a hurt, lovingly, tenderly, and the element not only inspires the careful, tender treatment, but it goes into the hurt. It acts as a salve and a strength. It gradually binds and unites the ruptured parts. Bind it with indifference, bind or wash it as an irksome task, and that sentiment inspires not only a careless and even rough treatment, but fails to so salve and strengthen it when the needed element is love. Bind it with actual hatred, and you are self-poisoning the part affected. Hate is the element of poison, love of healing. The same principle and process applies to the weak eye, the deafened ear, or any ailing or weak organ. Will at times your affection direct to the ailing member, and in that spirit ask it to recover its strength. Be not deterred by the apparent simplicity of this statement, but try it. If you are impatient or angry at eye or ear for not being perfect in their office, You do but throw that element of impatience on those organs. You fret and annoy them in their efforts to do their best. There is as yet no such thing as a relatively perfected life among our race, because such a life means a life and a body without disease or pain, and also a life without the present form of death to the body. A relatively perfected life means a life whereby a mind or spirit has grown to, or gathered so much power by simply asking or praying for power, or in other words, setting that mind as a magnet in the proper attitude to attract power, that it shall be able to constantly recuperate or make over the body with fresher, newer, and finer material, and also to put this body on or take it off, materialize it at pleasure, as did the Christ immediately after his crucifixion. The Jews had only destroyed his material body. The Spirit of Christ had power to reclothe itself with a new body. Of this another record illustration is the prophet Elijah's translation to heaven. That which his companion, Elisha, saw was Elijah's spiritual or finer body, the counterpart of his material body, and this body was of such fine element that it had come into the domain of, and could make use of, an attraction not yet recognized by our scientists, the attraction or power which draws upwards, the opposite of the attraction of gravitation, which draws downward or toward earth. The attraction of aspiration, every thought or desire of ours to be nobler, more refined, more free from malice, ill will to others, and to do others good without exacting conditions, is a thing, a force of unseen element, which does actually tend to draw upward, or in other words, away from the earth, or any form of that cruder type of spirit seen of the physical eye, or apparent to the body's touch, which we call matter. This is the aspiring order of thought you draw from the higher realms of spirit or element every time you wish, pray, or desire it. You are drawing to you then that of unseen element which incorporates itself with your body and spirit, and it then commences literally to draw you toward the realm and element of greater, broader, purer life, existent in zones or bands about our planet. It will, as you persist in this aspiring thought, make you stand more erect. The phrase, the upright man or woman, implies that the effect of this unseen element so brought you of aspiration makes you physically as well as spiritually upright. It lifts every physical organ into place. It is the thought current drawing from above the mood of impure or immature thoughts, the mood of unwise or personal selfishness, which seeks only personal gratification without thought or care of others. The thought or mood of gloom, discouragement, and self-deprecation comes of the overruling attraction of earthly, seen, or physical things. When you are ruled by the attraction of gravitation, or in other words, the attraction of material things, it will tend to make your shoulders rounded and stooping, your head bowed, and your eye downcast. Your heart will also in some way be literally bowed down through grief or worry or anger or some form of immature thought or attraction coming of seen things or cruder forms of spirit. Every organ of the body will be similarly displaced and tend toward the earth. There is always between things and forms material and things and forms spiritual an exact and literal correspondence. The shape of every man and woman's body, the expression of the face, their every gesture and mannerism to the crook of a finger, and their physical health is the exact correspondence of their physical condition, or in other words, of the state of their minds. It is a duplication in seen matter and movement of what they are thinking in unseen matter. As you are ruled more and more by the attraction of aspiration, the desire to become more and more of a god or goddess, the determination to conquer all the evil within you, which is the only way to conquer any and all evil outside of you, your form will in accordance grow more upright, your eye will be more open and uplifted, your heart will be lifted up,
Your cheeks will bloom with fresh color. Your blood will fill more and more with a finer and powerful element, giving to your limbs strength, vigor, suppleness, and elasticity of movement. You are then filling more and more with the elixir of life, which is no myth, but a spiritual reality and possibility. Our race hitherto has been dominated by the attraction of physical things or seen element. It has said there is nothing in existence but what can be seen or felt of the outer, inferior, or coarser senses, and consequently there has been nothing else to us. A man may perish of thirst, surrounded by springs of cool water, and if he not know of such springs, there are none for him. Our condition has been analogous to that. With the more perfected race of the future on this planet, there will be no painful death of the body as is present. Every such painful death is the direct result of sin and transgression of the law of life. The ending of the body of the future will be the birth or development of a new physical body, for which the old one shall serve as a shell or envelope until the new one is ripe and ready to come forth in a manner analogous to the development of the moth or butterfly from the cocoon. Such growths and transitions will take place at lesser and lesser intervals, until at last the spirit will grow to such power that it can will and attract to itself instantly, out of surrounding elements, a body to use, so long as it pleases on this stratum of life. This is the condition foreseen by Paul when he said, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" And again where he writes, "The last great enemy which shall be overcome is death." We quote Paul because no ancient teacher has more plainly foreshadowed these possibilities than he. Undoubtedly, they were known to others both of the recorded and unrecorded human history of this planet, which stretches back to periods far more remote than those inferred in the Mosaic creation. These truths, these possibilities for avoiding decay, death, and pain, and growing into and taking on a newer and newer body, and newer, fresher, and more vigorous life, vitally affect us of today. We must not regard these statements as affecting only a coming race of people of some far distant future. They affect us. They are possibilities for us. We have belonging to us the powers for bringing to us new life and new bodies. If you are not told of these powers, how can you ever use them? You are then as a pauper having, unknown to yourself, $1,000 banknote sewed up in the lining of your ragged coat. This knowledge is for you the pearl of great price. You cannot sell this pearl. You cannot trade it for that of your neighbors. You cannot accumulate your neighbor's powers. You can only grow and use yours alone. You wonder perhaps and say, can these truths, these marvels, belong to our commonplace age and time? But ours is not a commonplace or prosaic age and time. It is only our lack of seeing clearly which may make our time seem commonplace. We live surrounded by the same elements, and we are in possession of the same powers to greater or lesser extent, whereby the 3 young Jews passed unharmed through the fiery furnace, whereby the prophet Daniel, through exercise of the superior force of human thought, quelled the ferocity of the lions in the den, whereby Paul shook off the serpent's venom, whereby the man of Nazareth performed his wonderful works. Was not this God's power, you ask? Yes, the power of God, or the infinite, an incomprehensible spirit of eternal good, working in and through these his children, as the same power can work in and through us all, the more we call it to us, demand it, importune it, and depend on it. It is simply the power of the higher mind over the lower or cruder mind. All seen element, or as we call it matter, is expression of the lower or cruder mind. Rocks, hills, clouds, waves, trees, animals, and men are all varying expressions of the lower, cruder mind. The power of mind over matter means the power of the higher mind over all these expressions of the lower mind. The aspiration, The earnest prayer or demand to be better, to have more power, to become more refined, will bring more and more of the finer elements and forces. That is spirit to you. But the motive must be the natural, heartfelt, zealous wish to impart what you receive to others. You cannot call the fullness of this power to you if you intend living only for self. You may get it to a degree and accomplish much by it. Your demand if living only for self may bring to you houses, wealth, and fame. But the demand based on the selfish motive will, in the end, bring only pain, disease, and disappointment. End of chapter 12. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 13 of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 13. The Accession of New Thought. New thought is new life. When an invention, a discovery first breaks on the inventor's mind, it fills him with joy. The blood in his veins surges with a fresher impetus. The author or poet is lifted into ecstasy of emotion by a new conception. I mean the relatively few creative authors and poets, not the many who, borrowing the fire of genius, put in their own lanterns and pass it off, often successfully, as their own. A piece of good news, as we term it in a period of gloom, depression, discouragement, the possible realization of a hope, the removal of an ill or danger, is but a thought after all, is but the picture in the mind of the thing desired, is not the thing itself, yet how it brings strength to the whole body. An entertaining spectacle, a drama so perfectly acted as to absorb all one's attention, an interview with one to whom we are strongly attracted, a pursuit or exercise or art which interests and fascinates, all these are food and nourishment, stimulation to the body, and in the absorption or excitement of the moment, hunger for material food may pass away or be forgotten. So we do not live by bread alone, but by our natures demand ever new and newer food of thought. The play so charming when first seen may become tiresome through repetition. The air so fascinating when first heard becomes worn through familiarity. There may even be longed for a change from the quality of the thought of the mind most attractive to us. I mean for all these a change, but only for a time. The play, the opera, the artist may in time be seen again and with an increase of pleasure, either from the influence of former association, or from new growths and shadings in the artist's rendering, or from new capacity in ourselves to see what we could not see before. Call then all new thought, and if you please, new emotion, food. Food is necessary to make the relatively perfect physical and mental man or woman, as is the bread we eat. We desire ever fresh food. We similarly desire and need always new and fresh thought. Old thought, constant repetition of the same thought, involves decay, sluggishness of mind, sluggishness of body. Suppose that we rose each morn with the absolute certainty that each day was to be a day involving to us more or less of the excitement of discovery in something useful and enjoyable, and also of similar use to others, something endurable for us and others, endurable for eternity, some unexpected branching out of yesterday's truth, which for yesterday seemed fully grown, something telling us how life may be made still fuller of durable and harmless enjoyment, some great law principle in nature recognized possibly for the first time in some heretofore called little thing, in the fall of a leaf, in the coloring of a leaf by the autumnal frost, in its almost equal vividness of color coming through the heat of spring. What must be the pleasure to an open and receptive mind to find today an increase of improvement in the quality almost despaired of yesterday, an increase of patience in doing the perplexing work, an increase of courage, an increase of perception to see beauty in what yesterday passed by with indifference, an increase of power to control unruly appetite, an increase of power to drive away unpleasant and therefore injurious thought. Would not such be encouraging, cheering, life-giving, health-giving thoughts? This order and accession of ever new thought knows no stop in any direction. It says, "Are you orderly today?" You will find some power and room and capacity to be more orderly tomorrow. Was your last effort in music, in painting, in composition, in acting, in oratory your greatest triumph? You will find some way of making it more perfect tomorrow. That will take nothing from the last effort. It is only a more beautiful and delicate tint for some already beautiful picture. The consciousness of such never-ending growth of improvement is also food for the growing mind, other than bread. Yet it is bread. It is the bread of life, and to be desired as our daily bread. Would not also the thought each morning that a great power, an infinitely wise mind, was always ready to give more knowledge to help you through troubles from without and troubles from within, would not such thought, and the trust begotten of it, be as food, strength, and healthy stimulation? Especially when the reality of this power and its ability to aid had been proven to you many, many times, so that the hope had become a conviction. Grant that new thought is healthy stimulation and also necessary food to a more perfected life, and the question arrives, how shall we get it? In other words, how may we attune ourselves, or how may we become more receptive to all that is beautiful and useful in nature? For in our religion, the useful always implies the beautiful. It is almost farcical to answer, live a pure life. That implies so much in so many cases it can be done, so much of inherent tendency to be outgrown, so many difficulties to be met, so many conditions necessary for such life so difficult to make. The desire for accumulation seems a law of our natures. In its cruder working, it accumulates money. In its higher form, it would accumulate powers and qualities of mind. I am this much or that much richer than I was this morning, says, with satisfaction and pleasure at night, the money accumulator. That pleasant thought is to him a bit of the bread of life, but not the enduring life, or in the end, if at all healthy life. I, may say the other man at night, am richer than I was this morning, by so much more patience, by a bit more of skill or dexterity in my art, by certain knowledge of which I knew nothing of 24 hours ago. Are we fully yet awakened to the thought that we are receptacles for thought, and with thought knowledge, and with knowledge power, and that our capacity for receiving all these may be limitless, and that the supply of power, knowledge, new thought in the universe is limitless also, and that it is all ours to draw from, and that the bank can no more break than eternity can end? There are thousands of things, events, and scenes in your past life which it is more profitable to forget than to remember, but by so forgetting, you allow entrance for new idea, which is new life. By remembering, you prevent the coming to you of such new idea and life. By forgetting, I mean that you should avoid living in unpleasant past scenes and remembrances. Absolutely to forget or wipe out completely from memory anything it has once taken note of is impossible. For everything you have seen, learned, sensed, or heard is stored away and is capable, under certain circumstances, of being brought to view again. In place of the term forgetting, it would be better to say you should cultivate the power of driving from your mind and putting out of sight whatever makes you feel unhappy, or whatever you discover that is unprofitable to remember. It is impossible, absolutely, to wipe out anything your memory has once written on its tablets, for whatever the scene, event, or experience may have been, It has become part of your real self or spirit. In other words, your spirit is made up of all its past experiences and consequent remembrances, extending to an infinite past. Of these, some are vivid, some are vague, and much is buried out of present sight, but capable under certain circumstances of being called to remembrance. To destroy such remembrance, if possible, would be to destroy so much of your mind. All experiences are valuable for the wisdom they bring or suggest, but once you have gained wisdom and knowledge from any experience, there is little profit in repeating it, especially if it has been unpleasant. You do actually repeat it when you remember it or live it over and over again in thought. This is what people are doing who brood over past misfortunes and disappointments. It is what people are doing when they recall with regret their youth as bright and joyous as compared with the gloom of their middle or old age. Live in the pleasant remembrance of your youth, if you so desire. That will do you good. But do not set it in the brightness and freshness against a dark background of the present. Do not think of it in that vein. Remember that time of your infancy and youth, with all the freshness and newness, was also the time of some other people's old age, when the world seemed stale and joyless, when to them all that life seemed capable of yielding seemed exhausted, when nothing seemed to remain but to wither and die. Remember also that today, if the world seems less bright than formerly, if the sun seems setting instead of rising, it seems now to the boy or girl of 10 or 15, as it did to you at that age. No person could hold his or her physical body and enjoy life who, as they lived on, lived in the past, and refused to set or open their minds to the future. In so doing, they accumulate more and more of the old and relatively lifeless thought, and this element materializes itself on the body. Their flesh, bone, blood, then becomes an actual expression of the dead and inert spirit. To live carrying such an ever-increasing load must result only in weakness and misery, so long as the spirit can carry it. But the mind rejecting the old, which it has no use for, and ever pressing on to the new, adds the new thought to itself, and this newness of idea will materialize the newer body. You do actually make the things before, pleasant or unpleasant for you, according to as you think of them in advance. There is a class of people who, if in difficulties, and anyone suggests a way out, instantly raise objections and find difficulties in the plan proposed. When in thought we so find difficulties, we actually make them. To lay awake nights and brood, devise, turn over, or invent possible coming troubles is force and industry ill employed in preparing the way for those troubles. In all business we must press on in mind to the successful result. We must see in mind or imagination the thing we plan completed, the system or method organized and in working order, the movement or undertaking advancing and ever growing stronger and more profitable. To spend time and force in looking back and living past troubles or obstacles over again, and out of such living and mental action to conjure more difficulties or oppositions, is literally to spend time and force in destroying your undertaking, or in manufacturing obstacles to put in your own way. Forgetting the things behind and pressing on to those before is a maxim having 1,000 intensely practical applications. Every business success is founded on it. Men who cease to live in old methods and press forward to new achieve the greatest financial success. But men who, having started out during their physical youth with the new, allow themselves with advancing years to hold on to what was new in their youth, but which is relatively old now, are really on the back track. Money may continue to pour in upon them, but their methods are really out of date, and a few more years will see their business superseded by the newer system. If you were debilitated, weak, or sick yesterday at any hour, do not commence today with living in thought in the same weakness or debility at that hour. Forget it, live away from it, and press onward to the thought of being strong, well, and vigorous at that hour. When you and mind look behind and live behind the thought of the sickness, weakness, or indisposition of yesterday, you are actually making the conditions for having the same physical troubles. When you at the day's commencement in thought look before to the new thing, the thought of health and strength at the time your lack of vigor commenced, you are making the conditions for realizing such health and strength. If it does not come the first day of such trial, try the next, and the day after that. The state you seek will come in time. Perhaps you may say to me in mind, but how can you prove these assertions? But how can you prove these assertions? They have not been realized in our time. Decay and death at last overtake all. You can commence yourself to prove them. If you experiment with any of the methods here suggested for working thought to profitable result, and you prove for yourself ever so little, you must thereby gain some faith in this law. If the law is proven to you by a little, is it unreasonable to say it will prove more if followed in this direction? Unreasoning prejudices are bred out of this continual living in the past. The man of 60 or 70 often lives in moods, usages, and customs peculiar to his youth. He accepts these as the most fit and proper thing for him. He would probably regard with disfavor and prejudice the man who at his daily business should wear the knee breeches, stockings, waistcoat, ruffled shirt, and cocked hat of the 18th century. Yet such style was common 100 years ago. His great-grandfather probably wore such a suit. Yet his great-grandfather would probably have regarded with the same disfavor and prejudice the man dressed in the fashion of today. So a few years relatively have begotten these two unreasoning prejudices with the great-grandfather and great-grandson, founded only on the fact that they were fashions peculiar to the youth of each. It is, of course, impossible for a person to fly in the face of popular custom or usage, to dress differently, or in certain ways live differently, without bringing on him unpleasant and even injurious results. For the action of many minds sending towards you ever the thought of prejudice, dislike, or ridicule would tend to injure mind and body. But the sentiment which sends this kind of thought toward another, who departs from any established custom, when that person thereby affects no one's peace or comfort, is a gross error. It is unreasoning mental tyranny which so regards with hostile mind a man who should today adopt the costume of the ancient Greeks, a garb, by the way, more sensible and comfortable than ours. Less than 200 years ago such a sentiment mobbed the man in England who carried the first umbrella. This sentiment comes of that fossilized condition of mind which persists in living in things that are behind, and averts itself from such as are before. Life is a continual advance forward. If we are advancing forward, it is better to look forward, and all are advancing, even the dullest, the grossest, and most perverse. A mighty, eternal, and incomprehensible force pushes us all forward. But while all are being so pushed, many linger and look back. Unconsciously, they oppose this force. So to do so is to court evil, pain, disease, and distress. Whatever the mind is set upon, or whatever it keeps most in its view, that it is bringing to it, and the continual thought or imagining must at last take form and shape in the world of seen and tangible things. I repeat this assertion often in books and in various forms of expression, because this fact is the cornerstone of your happiness or misery, permanent health and prosperity, or poverty. It needs to be kept as much as possible in mind. Our thought is the unseen magnet, ever attracting its correspondence in things seen and tangible. As we realize this more and more clearly, we shall become more and more careful to keep our mind set in the right direction. We shall be more and more careful to think happiness and success instead of misery and failure. It is very wonderful that the happiness or misery of our lives should be based on what seems so simple a law and method. but so-called simple things in nature, on investigation, generally turn out incomprehensible and ever-deepening mysteries. What most concerns us is to know a cause or agency that will produce a given result. When we realize that we can and do think ourselves into what we are, as regards health, wealth, and position, we realize also that we have found in ourselves the pearl of great price, and we hasten to tell our neighbor that he may seek and find in himself this pearl and power also, for no one is made poorer through his finding that which can belong to him alone, and all are made richer and happier as each finds his or her pearl, through the power it gives them to add to the general wealth and happiness. Life is fuller of possibilities for pleasure than has ever been realized. The real life means a perpetual and ever-increasing maturity. It means the preservation of the physical body, so that it can be used on this stratum of existence whenever the spirit desires to use it. It means the preservation of that body, not only free from pain and sickness, but free from debility, weakness, and decay of what we call old age, which in reality is only the wearing out of the instrument used by the spirit for lack of knowledge to ever recuperate and regenerate it. Life means the development in us of powers and pleasures which fiction, in its highest flights, has never touched. It means an ever-increasing freshness, an ever-increasing perception and realization of all that is grand, wonderful, and beautiful in the universe, a constantly increasing discovery of more and more that is grand, beautiful, and wonderful, a constantly increasing capacity for the emotional part of our natures to sense such happiness. Life is eternal in the discovery and realization of these joys. Their source is inexhaustible. Their quality and character must be unknown until they reach us. In the words of the apostolic record, "Eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him." In so-called ordinary things we get out of our lives and our senses but the merest fragment of the pleasure that can be made capable of giving us. Our food is capable of giving us far more pleasure to the sense of taste than it may now. We do not nearly get as much pleasure from the ear and the eye as they are capable of giving. With bodies more highly developed and refined, food, when taken into the stomach, should act as a healthy stimulant and give that impulse, vigor, and bounding life which it gives to the young animal. The movement of every muscle, as in walking, can be made to give pleasure. Through following the spiritual law, that peace of mind which passeth all understanding is the future to come to many. That it has not in the past been realized is no proof it will not be. Life, then, whether its forces are in activity or at rest, will be perpetual Elysium. But millions of our race do not look forward to such joyous possibilities at all. They had never heard of them. The great majority would not believe did they hear of them. They press on in mind to what? To a belief which grows stronger with years that life is short, that old age and decay are absolute certainties and must come to all, that at a certain age of the body its powers must decrease, and that as weak and feeble old men and women now are before their eyes, so, in time, they must be, and that one great aim of life should be to lay up a store of money to provide for old age. These are not pleasant things to contemplate. The many do not contemplate them. They shut their eyes to these gloomy views of the future, but they believe in them just the same. They believe and dread. If they believe, they must in mind press on to such belief. It is this pressing forward that makes of the thing believed in a material or physical reality. Providing for old age makes the old age of the body, because the person so providing sees him or herself for years as helpless and decrepit. What the mind so projects for the future, it is making for the future. A material thing, money, is relied on to secure one from ills. when all material things are quite powerless to prevent such ills. The rich man with an aged, worn, diseased body can only buy with his money a better room and bed to live in than the poor man. His money does not prevent disease and weakness. It cannot give him an appetite for the costliest food. In pain and anguish, the emperor, in all respects, is on the same level with the pauper, for in extreme misery a soft bed and numerous attendants give little or no comfort. Now in all of this, thought element worked in ignorance in the wrong direction proves that it brings a result, but a woeful one. It is only the cultivation of the power of the spirit over the body that can prevent these ills. That power we first begin to cultivate and increase when we come to recognize and believe that mind or spirit is the power governing our bodies, and that whatever mind persistently images, thinks, or imagines, it makes. Now unconsciously we image in the wrong direction. We think the old age or wearing out of the body must be, because so far as we know, it has always been. We press on in imagination, an unwelcome belief to gloom and physical decay. We hold these sad pictures ever in our minds, do not look toward that view to life, an ever-increasing life. In the New Testament, the last revelation, we find the Christian, an apostolic teaching full of the sentiment of life and life everlasting. Death is not argued or implied as an absolute necessity, but as an enemy, which is ultimately to be destroyed. It is never said or implied that the advent of greater revelations was not to be until millions or millions of years in the future. The dawn of such advent may be now. It is now not because of any one man's writing or assertions, but because many minds are now open to the reception of the greater revelation, for which centuries has been knocking at humanity's door, but could not enter by reason of the obtuseness and dull ear of those whom it sought to arouse and benefit. The only dead people in the universe are the spiritually dead, those dead in trespasses and sins, who have not as yet learned to forget, or rather to refuse to live in and depend on the relatively dead or inert element of earth, instead of that drawn from the higher source. Still the few in the vanguard pressing onward are crying out, "Why, here under our noses is the greatest of all motive powers. Why human thought is a real element, a real force, darting out like electricity from every man's or woman's mind, injuring or relieving, killing or curing, building fortunes or tearing them down, working for good or ill, every moment, night or day, asleep or awake, carving, molding, and shaping people's faces and making them ugly or agreeable." Before you give so much of your thought to others, ask, in view of these possibilities, is some not due to yourself? If you can build yourself up into a living power, if you can, with others, prove that physical health and vigor can take place of old age, that all disease can be banished from the body, that material riches and necessities can come of laws and methods now not generally practiced, and that life is not the short, unsatisfactory, hopeless thing which at the best it is now, will you not to the world at large do 1,000-fold more good than if you expended your thought in feeding a few hungry mouths or relieving a few physical necessities of others? Our richest men, our rulers, our famous men in art, science, and war, our professors, our ministers, our greatest successes, what is their end? Weakness, decay, and disease. Our more thoughtful people admit that by the time they have learned something of life, it is time to die. The obituary from the living is at best an apology for the unsatisfactory ending of a human life. Mankind demands something better. That demand, that cry has been swelling and increasing in volume for many centuries. Demand must always be answered. This demand is now being answered, first to the few, next to the many. New light, new knowledge, and new results in human life and all it involves are coming to this earth. End of chapter 13. End of Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. Recording by Andrea Fiore.